Liam felt the lie settle in his mouth, heavy and cold like a stone. He practiced the words in the silence of his study, the room filled with the low hum of servers that powered his life. And hers. "It's over, Clara," he whispered to the empty chair opposite him. "The business. It failed. We've lost everything." The sentence itself felt like a betrayal, not to his wife, but to the years of relentless work, the sleepless nights, and the silent sacrifices that had built his empire. An empire she knew nothing about. To her, he was just Liam. Dependable, quiet, and moderately successful. The man who ran a small, niche tech consulting firm that afforded them a life of comfortable luxury she was perpetually trying to upgrade. He stood and walked to the window, looking out over the manicured lawns of their estate. The house was her design, a monument to her tastes. It was grand, cold, and impersonal, much like their marriage had become. For months, a chilling suspicion had coiled around his heart. It started with small things. The hushed phone calls that ended the moment he entered a room. The faint scent of a cologne that was not his, clinging to her clothes. The way her eyes would glaze over when he spoke of his work, a flicker of boredom and contempt she barely bothered to hide. His love for her had been a blinding sun, but now he saw the sharp, cruel shadows it cast. He had to know the truth, not just suspect it, but see it, hear it, and hold it in his hands like a shard of broken glass. So, he had prepared. Last week, under the guise of a security system upgrade, he had installed a network of microscopic cameras and audio recorders throughout their home. They were in the living room, the kitchen, her dressing room, even the poolside cabana. It felt like a violation, a sickening intrusion into his own life. But his wife's detachment had become a fortress, and this was his only way inside. The final piece of his plan was this lie. A devastating, life-altering lie that would serve as the catalyst. It was the stone he would throw into the placid waters of their life to see what monsters lurked beneath. He found her by the pool, scrolling through her phone, a picture of serene indifference. She wore a designer bikini that cost more than his first car, her expression one of vague dissatisfaction as she flicked through images of other people's perfect lives. He sat down in the lounge chair beside her, his heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat of dread and resolve. He had to make it look real. He had to embody the failure he was about to announce. He slumped in his chair, running a hand through his hair. He let his shoulders sag and focused on the knot of anxiety in his stomach, amplifying it until it felt like his entire world was crumbling. "Clara," he began, his voice raspy with manufactured despair. She did not look up from her phone. "What is it, Liam?"
"I'm busy." "Please," he said, the word catching in his throat. "This is important." She sighed, an exaggerated theatrical sound of pure annoyance. She slowly lowered her phone, her eyes finally meeting his. They were cold, impatient. "What?" she snapped. He took a deep, shuddering breath. There was a market crash. A key investor pulled out. It caused a domino effect. He let the fabricated story unfold, weaving a tale of financial ruin that sounded painfully plausible. "The business, Clara. My company. It's gone. It's bankrupt." He looked at her, his eyes pleading for a shred of comfort, a flicker of empathy. He was playing the part of a broken man, but a part of him desperately hoped he was wrong, that she would rush to his side and tell him they would face this together. Her face remained a perfect, unmoving mask. There was no shock, no sadness, just a slow, calculating stillness. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating.
"We've lost everything," he finally choked out, delivering the final line. The house, the savings, all of it. Clara stared at him for a long moment. Her lips, usually curved in a pout or a smirk, were a thin, hard line. He saw a flicker of something in her eyes, but it was not sympathy. It was assessment. It was appraisal. Then she spoke. Her voice was flat, devoid of any emotion. "So, the money is gone." It was not a question, it was a confirmation. "Yes," he whispered, his gaze fixed on her, waiting. She stood up, her movements fluid and unhurried. She did not reach for him. She did not offer a single word of support. She simply picked up her phone and walked back toward the house, her posture as rigid and elegant as ever. Liam remained by the pool, the sun beating down on him. He felt a profound emptiness, a hollow space where his hope had been. The performance was over, and the first act of his tragedy had begun. He gave her 5 minutes before he followed, his steps heavy with the certainty of what he was about to witness. He went to his study, the one room she never entered, calling it his nerd cave. He closed the door, the sound of the latch clicking into place like the cocking of a gun. On his multi-monitor setup, he pulled up the live feeds from the cameras. He found her in her dressing room, a space larger than the first apartment they had shared. She was not crying. She was not panicking. She was pacing, her phone clutched in her hand like a weapon. He enabled the audio feed, and the sound of her sharp, angry breaths filled his ears. He watched as she stopped pacing and stood before her full-length mirror, staring at her own reflection. She took a deep, steadying breath, and then she dialed a number. Liam's blood ran cold. He knew who it would be. He had always known. A man's voice answered, smooth and confident. "Finally, I was waiting." It was Marcus, her ex-boyfriend. The man she always brought up when she wanted to make Liam feel small. Marcus, the visionary investor. Marcus, the man who knows how to live. "He's finished," Clara said, her voice a venomous whisper. "The whole thing went belly up. He just told me. He's a pathetic, blubbering mess." Liam flinched. The words were like a physical blow. He had given this woman everything. He had built his world around her happiness, and in the moment of his feigned collapse, this was her reaction. Cruel, instant dismissal. "I told you he was a loser," Marcus's voice oozed through the speaker. "A boring little worker bee. He was never in your league, baby. Is it done? Is the money really gone?" "Completely," she said with a chilling finality. "He said they'll take the house, everything. He lost it all. The fool." Liam leaned closer to the screen, his knuckles white as he gripped the edge of his desk. He felt a strange detachment, as if he were watching a movie about someone else's life. The pain was there, a deep, crushing ache, but it was overlaid with a cold, clarifying rage. "So it's time," Clara continued, a new, eager energy in her voice. "I'm done. I'm not sticking around to live in some disgusting little apartment and watch him cry. I want out." "Good," Marcus replied. "Pack a bag, only the essentials, jewelry, portable valuables. We can fight for the rest later in the divorce. My lawyer says you're entitled to half of whatever's left, even if it's just scraps. We'll squeeze every last penny out of him." "There won't be any pennies left," she scoffed. "But I'll take what I can. I deserve it, for all the years I wasted on him." Wasted. The word echoed in the silent study. The years he had spent loving her, providing for her, enduring her casual cruelty, she considered them wasted. "I'll be there in an hour," Marcus said. "Leave the front gate open. We'll be on a flight to Monaco by midnight. It's time you had a real life, with a real man." "I can't wait," Clara breathed, a genuine smile finally gracing her lips. It was a smile Liam had not seen in years, and it was not for him. "I'll see you soon." The call ended, Clara tossed her phone onto a velvet chaise lounge and began to move with purpose. She pulled out a suitcase and started methodically pulling jewelry from its boxes. Diamonds, sapphires, gifts he had given her for birthdays and anniversaries, each one a memory he had cherished. To her, they were just portable assets. Liam switched off the monitor. He did not need to see any more. The truth was not a shard of glass. It was a guillotine blade, and it had just fallen, severing the last thread of his love for her. He sat in the dark, the hum of his real business, his real life, surrounding him like a fortress. She thought he was a failed consultant. She had no idea that his little firm was merely the public-facing tip of an iceberg of immense global scale. His main company, Omniguard Cybernetics, was a ghost. It existed in the ether of secure networks and encrypted data streams, a silent titan in the world of international cybersecurity. It held patents that underpinned the digital security of a dozen Fortune 500 companies and several governments. The money it generated was vast, astronomical, and hidden behind a labyrinth of shell corporations and offshore trusts. The house she was currently looting was not in his name. It was owned by a holding company. The cars, the art, the very credit cards she used, all corporate assets. She had lived in his world, but she had never been a part of it. Her name was on nothing. He had built this structure for security, to protect his assets from corporate espionage and hostile takeovers. He never imagined he would use it to protect himself from his own wife. A cold, hard resolve settled over him. The hurt was still there, a raw wound in his chest, but it was now fuel for a different kind of fire. She had called him a fool. She had called him pathetic. She and Marcus were going to squeeze him for every last penny. He smiled, a grim, mirthless expression in the dark. They were about to find out how few pennies he truly had, and how many billions they could never touch. He remembered the early years when they had nothing but a tiny apartment and dreams. He had been a struggling coder, and she had been a waitress with eyes that sparkled with ambition. He thought they were ambitious for a shared future. He realized now her ambition was a solo flight, and he was just the runway. As his first software program gained traction, the money started to come in. It was a trickle at first, then a steady stream. He had been so excited to share it with her, to give her the things she had always wanted, a nicer car, a bigger apartment, a vacation to Italy. But with every new luxury, her appetite grew. The stream became a river, and the river an ocean, but it was never enough. His joy in providing was met with her expectation of receiving. His pride in his work was met with her disdain for its lack of glamour. "Why can't you be more like Marcus?" she would ask after a dinner party with her friends. "He doesn't sit behind a computer all day. He makes deals. He's a player." Marcus had been her college boyfriend, a charismatic finance bro from a wealthy family. He had cheated on her and broken her heart, but in her memory, he had been mythologized into the epitome of success and excitement. A benchmark against which Liam would always fall short. Liam had tolerated it. He had absorbed the insults and the comparisons, telling himself it was just her way. He loved her, and he believed, foolishly, that his love and success would eventually be enough to make her happy. Now, listening to the recording of her call, he understood. She had never loved him. She had loved the lifestyle he could provide. He was not a husband, he was an investment. And now that her investment had seemingly gone bust, she was cashing out and moving on to the next one. He picked up his phone and made a call of his own. It rang twice before a calm, professional voice answered. Sterling. Mr. Jonathan Sterling was more than just a lawyer. He was the architect of Liam's financial fortress, a brilliant legal mind who had helped him structure his empire from the very beginning. "Jonathan," Liam said, his voice steady, "it's time. Execute the plan." There was a brief pause on the other end of the line. "Are you certain, Liam? Once we start this, there is no going back." Liam looked at the blank monitor where he had just watched his marriage die. He thought of Clara's cold eyes, her venomous words. He thought of her packing her bags to run away with another man while she believed him to be broken and penniless.
"I am absolutely certain," Liam said, a glacial calm descending over him. "Liquidate the subsidiary Liam Tech Consulting. Make the bankruptcy public and official. And Jonathan, I want you to begin—" "Consider it done," Mr. Sterling replied. "The first domino will fall tomorrow morning." Liam hung up. He did not need to ask what the first domino was. He and Sterling had mapped this out weeks ago as a contingency plan, a doomsday protocol he prayed he would never have to use. The plan was codenamed Cascade. It was designed to be a systematic, legal, and utterly devastating dismantling of his wife's world. He leaned back in his chair, the leather creaking like an old church door. He felt a profound sense of loss, a grief for the man he used to be, the man who had loved his wife so completely. That man was gone now. In his place was someone else, someone colder, more calculating, someone Clara had created.
An hour later, he watched on his monitor as a sleek sports car pulled silently up to the front of the house. Marcus got out, dressed in an expensive suit, looking every bit the predator he was. He did not even knock. He walked right in. Liam switched to the camera in the main foyer. He saw Clara rush into Marcus's arms, their embrace passionate and triumphant. "I'm so glad you're here," she whispered. "Let's get out of this mausoleum." "Did you get the good stuff?" Marcus asked, glancing at the suitcase she had by the door. "Everything that matters," she said with a smirk. Liam watched them leave, two thieves in the night, stealing things that were never really theirs. He felt a pang of something, but it was not jealousy. It was pity. They were celebrating a victory in a war they did not even understand, a war they had already lost. He spent the night in his study, not sleeping, just watching the city lights twinkle in the distance. He was charting a new course for his life, no longer defined by the futile effort of making Clara happy. The next day, the world would think he was a bankrupt failure, but he would know the truth. He was finally free. The first domino fell at precisely 10 a.m. the next morning. Clara and Marcus were celebrating with champagne and room service in a lavish suite at the Four Seasons, paid for with Marcus's credit card. They were toasting to their new life together. Clara, feeling bold, decided to do some celebratory shopping. She left Marcus in the suite and descended to the hotel's exclusive row of boutiques. She walked into a Chanel store with the unearned confidence of a queen. She picked out a handbag, a pair of shoes, and a ridiculously expensive scarf. "I'll take all of this," she announced to the sales associate, pulling out her platinum credit card. The card Liam paid for. The card linked to an account she believed was now empty. The associate swiped the card. A frown flickered across her face. She swiped it again. "I'm sorry, madam," she said, her voice polite but firm. "This card has been declined." Clara's smile froze. "That's impossible. Run it again." The associate ran it one more time. "Declined," she repeated. "It says the account has been closed." A flush of angry color rose in Clara's cheeks. She snatched the card back. "Fine." She pulled out a second card, her emergency card, also linked to one of Liam's accounts. "Declined. Account closed." Panic began to prickle at the edges of her arrogance. She tried a third card, the same result. Shoppers around her were beginning to stare. The sales associate looked at her with a mixture of pity and suspicion. "There must be some mistake," Clara hissed, her voice trembling with humiliation. She threw the items down on the counter and stormed out of the store, her face a mask of fury. She immediately called Liam. He was expecting the call. He let it ring 5 times before answering, injecting a note of weary exhaustion into his voice. "Hello, Liam, what is going on?" she shrieked into the phone. "All of my cards were declined. You've embarrassed me in the middle of Chanel." Liam sighed, playing his part to perfection. "Clara, I told you, the bankruptcy. They must have frozen all the accounts. It's standard procedure. I'm so sorry." "Sorry? You're sorry?" she screamed. "I'm stranded here. How am I supposed to pay for anything?" I don't know," he stammered, letting his voice crack. "I have nothing, Clara. They took everything." "This is a nightmare," she spat. "You are a complete and utter failure." She hung up on him. Liam stared at his phone, a cold smile touching his lips. It was just the beginning. Back in the hotel suite, Clara relayed the disaster to Marcus, who was looking at his own laptop with a deep scowl. "Forget your cards," he said, his voice tight with anxiety. "I've got bigger problems." "What could be bigger than me being publicly humiliated?" she demanded. "The SEC," he said, pointing to an official-looking email on his screen. "They've launched a full-scale audit of my fund. They're freezing all my assets pending the investigation, all of them." Clara's eyes widened in horror. "What? Why?" "I don't know. It says they received an anonymous tip about irregularities. This is bad, Clara. This is really bad." His voice, usually so smooth and confident, was laced with panic. His entire investment firm was a carefully constructed house of cards, a Ponzi scheme that preyed on wealthy but foolish clients. An audit would destroy him. The second domino had fallen. Mr. Sterling's anonymous tip, backed by a file of preliminary evidence Liam had gathered on Marcus over the past few months, had hit its mark perfectly. Clara sank onto the bed, the reality of her situation beginning to dawn on her. She had abandoned a man she thought was broke for a man who was about to be. The luxurious escape to Monaco was evaporating before her eyes. The cascade continued. The next day, while Clara and Marcus were frantically calling lawyers and trying to unfreeze their funds, a tow truck arrived at the country club where Clara had left her car, a custom white Range Rover. The club manager tried to intervene, but the driver produced a repossession order from the legal owner of the vehicle, a corporation named Omniguard Holdings. The car was hooked up and unceremoniously towed away from its prime parking spot, much to the amusement of Clara's social rivals who were lunching on the terrace. News of the repossession spread through her social circle like wildfire. Her phone, which was usually buzzing with invitations and gossip, fell silent. She was no longer the wife of a successful man. She was the wife of a bankrupt failure. She had become toxic. The final blow of the initial wave came that afternoon. A courier arrived at the hotel and delivered a thick envelope to her. Inside were 2 documents. The first was a formal eviction notice for the house, demanding the premises be vacated within 72 hours, as the property was being liquidated by its corporate owners to cover outstanding debts. The second document was a petition for divorce. Clara stared at the papers, her hands shaking. The grounds for divorce were listed in stark, brutal detail. Adultery and conspiracy to commit fraud. Attached as Exhibit A was a full transcript of her phone call with Marcus, the call she had made from her dressing room. The room began to spin. She looked at Marcus, who was pale and sweating, his own world collapsing around him. They were trapped. She had walked away from a comfortable life into a prison of her own making. Liam, meanwhile, observed the fallout from a quiet, minimalist apartment he had leased under a different name. He had his own feed of news, carefully curated by Mr. Sterling's team. He read the gleeful gossip columns detailing Clara's downfall. He saw the photos of her car being towed. He imagined the look on her face when she read the divorce petition. He felt a grim satisfaction, but it was not joyful. It was the somber satisfaction of a surgeon removing a cancer. The procedure was necessary, but the wound remained. He took no pleasure in her suffering, but he recognized its necessity. Her cruelty had been a poison, and this was the only antidote. He spent his days in quiet contemplation and strategic planning. He was not just dismantling his old life, he was building a new one. He started sketching out plans for a new venture, a charitable foundation dedicated to promoting digital literacy and protecting individuals from the kind of online fraud that Marcus had perfected. He was rediscovering a part of himself he had suppressed for years, the innovator, the creator. For so long, his work had been a means to an end, making money to make Clara happy. Now his work could have a purpose again. Clara's desperation grew. With Marcus's assets frozen and her own access to funds cut off, they were hemorrhaging money. The five-star hotel suite became an oppressive cage. They argued constantly, their beautiful new life together descending into a vortex of blame and recrimination. "This is your fault," she would scream at Marcus. "Your stupid scheme. You were supposed to be my ticket out, not another sinking ship." "My fault," he would rage back. "You were the one married to the supposed tech genius. I thought he had real assets we could go after." "You came to me with nothing." In a last-ditch effort, Clara decided she had to see Liam, to appeal to him directly. She tried pleading, then threatening. She left him dozens of voicemails, her tone shifting from furious to tearful and back again. Liam listened to them all, his expression unreadable. They were the desperate cries of a predator caught in a trap. He did not respond. Finally, a letter arrived from Mr. Sterling's office, addressed to both Clara and Marcus. It was an invitation to a meeting at the law firm's headquarters. The subject was a final settlement discussion regarding the division of remaining marital assets. A tiny spark of hope ignited in Clara's chest. A settlement. That meant there was something left. Perhaps Liam was willing to be merciful, to give her a small portion to go away quietly. It was a lifeline, and she grabbed it. "We have to go," she told Marcus. "This is our last chance. We have to be smart, be united. We can still get something out of him." Marcus, facing federal indictment and financial ruin, agreed. They had nothing left to lose. They prepared for the meeting like soldiers preparing for battle, strategizing how they would pressure, manipulate, and guilt Liam into giving them a payout. They still saw him as the weak, soft-hearted man they could easily roll. It was a fatal miscalculation. The day of the meeting was grey and overcast, the sky the colour of slate. Clara and Marcus arrived at the imposing glass and steel tower that housed Sterling and Associates. They had to take a taxi, a humbling experience that only hardened their resolve. They looked worn and haggard, but they had dressed for the part. Clara wore a severe black dress, an attempt at sombre sophistication. Marcus wore his last good suit, trying to project an aura of confidence he no longer possessed. They were escorted by a silent assistant to a large conference room on the top floor. The room was intimidating, with a massive mahogany table and a panoramic view of the city skyline. At the head of the table sat Mr. Sterling, his face impassive. The chair next to him was empty. "Where is he?" Clara demanded, her voice sharp. "Where is Liam?" "Mr. Monroe will be with us shortly," Mr. Sterling said calmly. "Please have a seat." They sat opposite him, the vast expanse of polished wood between them feeling like a chasm. The silence in the room was heavy, broken only by the ticking of a grandfather clock in the corner. Minutes crawled by. Clara's agitation grew. She was about to say something when the conference room door opened. Liam walked in. Clara gasped. The man who entered the room was not the husband she knew. The Liam she remembered wore simple, comfortable clothes, his posture slightly stooped from years spent over a keyboard. He was quiet, unassuming, almost apologetic in his presence. This man was different. He wore a bespoke dark grey suit that fit him perfectly. His shoulders were back, his posture radiating a quiet power. His hair was impeccably styled, and his face, clean-shaven, was set in an expression of cold, absolute control. He looked like he owned the building, which, through one of his corporations, he did. He did not look at her. He walked to the empty chair beside Mr. Sterling and sat down, placing a slim leather portfolio on the table in front of him. He exuded an aura of such profound authority that Clara felt a knot of pure dread tighten in her stomach. "Liam," she began, trying to inject a note of wounded softness into her voice. "I'm so glad you agreed to see us. This has all been a terrible misunderstanding." Liam finally turned his head and looked at her. His eyes were not the warm, loving eyes she remembered. They were like chips of ice. "There's been no misunderstanding, Clara," he said, his voice low and steady, a voice she had never heard before. It cut through the atmosphere like a blade. He opened the portfolio. "You are here because you believe there are remaining marital assets to divide. You are correct, there are. But first, let's clear up a few things." He looked from her to Marcus, his gaze lingering on the other man with undisguised contempt. "You both operated under a series of assumptions. Assumption 1, that my business failed. Assumption 2, that I was financially ruined. And Assumption 3, that you were entitled to any part of what I had built." He paused, letting the words hang in the air. "You were wrong, on all counts." From his portfolio, he slid a document across the table. It was a one-page summary of a financial statement. Clara picked it up, her hands trembling. Her eyes scanned the page, and the color drained from her face. The document was a valuation report for a company called Omniguard Cybernetics. She saw numbers with so many zeros she could barely comprehend them.
$9,100,000,000. The owner was listed as a private trust of which the sole beneficiary was Liam Monroe. What is this?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. "That," Liam said, "is my real business, the one I built while you were complaining about my boring job and shopping with the money it provided. Liam Tech Consulting was a small, insignificant subsidiary, a shell. I bankrupted it myself." Clara stared at him, her mind reeling. It was impossible. This quiet, simple man she had married, this was him? "You spent 8 years treating me like your personal bank account," Liam continued, his voice still unnervingly calm. "You spent 8 years mocking my work, comparing me to him." He gestured dismissively at Marcus. "And lamenting the life you thought you deserved." "But what you didn't know," he said, leaning forward slightly, "was that the life you were living was a pale imitation of the one I could have given you." "I kept my wealth private for security reasons. I wanted a life, not a lifestyle. I wanted a partner, not a parasite." He then pulled a small digital recorder from his portfolio and placed it on the table. He pressed a button. Clara's own voice filled the room, tinny and cruel. "He's finished. The whole thing went belly up. He's a pathetic, blubbering mess." He let the entire conversation play out, her plotting with Marcus, their plan to squeeze him for every penny,
their triumphant escape. When it was over, the silence was absolute. Clara's face was a grotesque mask of horror and disbelief. Marcus looked like he was about to be physically sick. "That was the moment my marriage ended," Liam stated, his voice flat. "The moment I realized the woman I loved never existed. She was a fiction I had created in my own mind." He turned his attention to Marcus. "And you, a cheap con artist running a Ponzi scheme."
Did you really think you could steal from me and get away with it? Marcus opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. The SEC audit was my doing, Liam said matter-of-factly. My team compiled a dossier on your entire operation, every illegal transaction, every defrauded investor. They have it all. You are going to prison for a very, very long time. As if on cue, the conference room doors opened again. This time, it was not an assistant. Two men in dark suits with federal badges clipped to their belts stepped inside. They walked directly to Marcus. "Marcus Thorne," one of the agents said, his voice booming in the quiet room. "You are under arrest for wire fraud, securities fraud, and money laundering." Marcus turned white as a sheet. He stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor as the agents cuffed his hands behind his back. He did not say a word. He looked at Liam, his eyes wide with a mixture of terror and dawning comprehension.
He had not just picked a fight with his ex-girlfriend's husband, he had walked into the jaws of a leviathan. They led him out of the room. The door closed, leaving just Liam, Mr. Sterling, and a completely shattered Clara. She finally broke. A terrible, guttural sob ripped from her throat. The mask of arrogance and composure was gone, replaced by the raw, ugly face of utter despair. "Liam, please," she wept, the tears streaming down her face. "I'm sorry. I didn't know. I was a fool. Please don't do this. I love you. I've always loved you." Liam watched her, his expression unchanged. The tears, the desperate pleas, they meant nothing to him now. It was all just another performance. "No," he said, the word simple and final. "You loved the idea of my money. When you thought it was gone, you threw me away like trash. Your love is worthless." He stood up. "As for the marital assets," he said, looking down at her, "this house, the cars, the jewelry, they were never mine. They are corporate assets owned by my trust. You are not entitled to any of them. Your name is on a joint checking account that currently has a balance of $112. Mr. Sterling will inform you that given the evidence of your infidelity and conspiracy to defraud me, you will be lucky if you get half of that." He looked at her one last time, a woman he had once adored, now reduced to a weeping, broken stranger. "You wanted a rich man, Clara," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "You had one, you just never saw him." With that, he turned and walked out of the conference room, not looking back. He did not feel triumph, he did not feel joy, he felt quiet. The storm that had raged inside him for months had finally passed, leaving behind a clean, empty peace. Mr. Sterling slid a final set of papers across the table toward Clara. "These are the final divorce terms," he said, his voice professional and unsympathetic. "Sign them, and you can walk out of here with nothing. Contest them, and we will pursue criminal charges for conspiracy. The choice is yours." Clara's fate was sealed. She lost everything. The divorce left her with no assets, no social standing, and no prospects. The friends who had once flocked to her parties now crossed the street to avoid her. She was a pariah, a living ghost in the world she had once tried so desperately to conquer. She ended up moving back in with her parents in a small town she had sworn she would never return to. Her life a cautionary tale whispered at country clubs. Marcus was convicted on all charges. The evidence against him was so overwhelming that the trial was a mere formality. He was sentenced to 25 years in federal prison, his life of flashy cars and cheap thrills exchanged for a concrete cell. His other victims, a collection of retirees and small business owners he had swindled, received some restitution from the assets liquidated by the government, funds that Liam's team helped locate. Liam never saw Clara again. He moved on, not with bitterness, but with a renewed sense of purpose. He formally dissolved Omniguard's secrecy, rebranding the company under his own name and taking it public in a landmark IPO that made headlines around the world. He was no longer a ghost in the machine. He was one of its most respected architects. True to his vision, he used a significant portion of his wealth to launch the Monroe Foundation for Digital Ethics. Its mission was to educate the public about online security and to fund startups developing technology to protect ordinary people from financial predators like Marcus. It was through the foundation that he met Ava. She was a brilliant young architect hired to design the foundation's new headquarters, a building envisioned as a beacon of transparency and innovation. She was witty, kind, and fiercely intelligent. She was impressed by his vision and his passion for his work, not by the number in his bank account. They connected over shared ideas and late-night brainstorming sessions about building something meaningful. Their relationship grew slowly, organically, built on a foundation of mutual respect and genuine affection. One afternoon, months later, Liam and Ava were walking through a park near his new, much more modest home. It was a beautiful autumn day, the leaves turning brilliant shades of red and gold. They were laughing about something, a shared joke, when Ava paused and looked at him. "You seem so peaceful," she said softly. "For a man who runs a global empire." Liam smiled, a real, genuine smile that reached his eyes. He looked at the sky, at the families playing on the grass, at the simple, beautiful reality of the world around him. The ghosts of his past were finally gone. "Wealth isn't what you have," he said, thinking of Clara and her desperate, empty pursuit of more. "It's what you have left when you've lost everything else." In that moment, surrounded by the quiet beauty of a world he had reclaimed, he knew he had everything he would ever need. True power was not in the billions he commanded, but in the freedom to be himself. True wealth was not measured in dollars, but in the peace he had fought so hard to find, and the love he was finally building on a foundation of truth. He had lost a wife, but he had gained a life, and it was a life that was truly, immeasurably rich.